Hello. This is a word about Stevie Smith, whom in my title I call the poet. And this won't make any sense unless you try and Google or otherwise research Stevie, who shares a name with a much-mourned Canadian downhill racing skier of the same name, Stevie Smith. And in fact, Stevie Smith, the celebrated English poet, was known to her family as Peggy, Margaret, which shortens for reasons beyond my understanding to Peggy, traditionally in English, in England, and probably in all English-speaking countries, although you don't hear the name Peggy so much anymore. And so she was known as Peggy, and then nickname Stevie arrived because she was small and resembled a well-known jockey of the period. So it might have tickled Stevie to be capable of being mistaken for a famous downhill racer. So Stevie became one of the best-loved English poets of her time, which was most of the 20th century through to her death at the beginning of the 1970s. And she lived the kind of life that perhaps you might guess from her quirky and wonderful poems, which many commentators describe as having no precursors and no relatives, and being sui generis, completely unique. This is by no means so, and to demonstrate this, I'm going to read my favorite poem by Stevie Smith, Our Bog Is Dude. And this poem links her, as all her work does, in lesser or in greater degree, to the great English tradition of nonsense verse, whose most famous exponents are Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll. But even the great poets to whom she felt, in a sense, related, like Blake, have a relationship to the surreal tradition, as did really all the poets that she loved. They're great poets, but something in them is drawn onto the ice, onto the thin ice of meaning, to find a deeper truth, a more suggestive truth. And this is also in typical representative of her attitude in life, which was she was relatively hostile, suspicious of ideologies and religions, and she was torn between having been raised in a high Tory way by her beloved aunt who raised her, the Lion Aunt, and on the other hand her left-wing friends. She developed quite a following among the literati, as well as people who you might imagine falling in love with her poetry, not because they come to it from a literary tradition, but on the contrary, because something in the poems calls to their capacity to respond to these communications, not as a sort of part of an educational syllabus. In fact, the very opposite. However, they were also loved by the famous writers of the time, and this meant that she was caught between two opposing streams, the left-wing tendencies of her friends and the Tory authoritarianism of her aunt. And she came out of it guarded and suspicious about all political programs and ideas. And you can see that from the very title of this poem, Our Bog Is Dude, although you've no idea what bog or dude are, nonetheless, there's a sense that maybe something is dead, something that people trusted deeply, is no longer available. And she herself lived a life that you might have written for her if you knew her poems and nothing about her life. It was a spinsterish life, largely celibate. We don't know if it was 100% celibate. She never married, never had children, and she looked after her aunt, who lived to almost to 100, I think, the ripe old age of 96 or 97, in the same house, stayed in the same little suburban terraced house in Palmer's Green in London. Not a famous or glamorous environment, but one that makes total sense of Stevie herself and her poems. So you can see how she was beloved of ordinary people as well as smart people who saw things in her poems, whereas I think those of us who don't try and see too much in her poems actually get to see more than those who are deriving things from it. I loved Our Bog Is Dude the moment I saw it. Even before I saw it, that title, thought, oh, I'm going to love this poem, because of its refusal of literal sense. And this turned out to be amply fulfilled by the poem, which goes, the title is Our Bog Is Dude, and the poem goes, Our bog is dude, our bog is dude, they lisped in accents mild. But when I asked them to explain, they grew a little wild. How do you know your bog is dude, my darling little child? We know because we wish it so, that is enough, they cried. And straight within each infant eye stood up the flame of pride. And if you do not think it so, you shall be crucified. Then tell me, darling little ones, what's dude? Suppose bog is just what we think, the answer came, just what we think it is. They bowed their heads. Our bog is ours, and we are wholly his. But when they raised them up again, they had forgotten me. Each one upon each other glared in pride and misery. For what was dude, and what their bog, they never could agree. Oh, sweet it was to leave them then, and sweeter not to see, and sweetest of all to walk alone beside the encroaching sea. The sea that soon should drown them all, that never yet drowned me. So, like many of Lewis Carroll's verses, I'm thinking of The Hunting of the Snark, and I'm thinking of, obviously, of Alice, something that starts off tremendously mild, that's the very word that is used at the beginning of the poem, sweet and happy, strangely darkens for no clear reason, nor do we really feel that the poet intended it this way. But the poem took over and darkened the palette and darkened the news, and suddenly what might have been Our Bog Is Dude, maybe you could read that as Our God Is Good, maybe, is what lies behind this. Of course, bog in Russian is God, and if you have any Russian, that pushes you in that direction, but so does dude pushes me in the other direction. It pushes me in the direction of dead, of another word that begins and ends one-syllable word with D. So it starts out very mildly. They're happy. They're lisping, the little children. Our bog is dude, our bog is dude. And then it starts to go a little strange when the speaker of the poem tries to find out what's a bog and what is dude, and they don't really answer except to threaten that if you don't believe that it is so, and it's so because we wish it, you shall be crucified. But the speaker continues rather mildly after this threat. Then tell me, darling little ones, And she asks again, tell me what's dude? Suppose a bog is just what we think, the answer came, just what we think it is. Our bog is ours, and we are wholly his. But they bowed their heads. But then when they raised them up again, they had forgotten me. This echoes Lewis Carroll terribly clearly. So many of these lines. Our bog is ours, and we are wholly his, suggests a religion, a cult. It's possible. It certainly doesn't seem to imply our God is dead, which is what I hear behind Our Bog Is Dude. Although I prefer just Our Bog Is Dude. I don't need to know. They couldn't agree what it meant, and that made it very sweet to leave them and not to see them and not to deal with it and go and walk up beside the sea and to think, well, the sea will drown everything, including them. The sea that so far has not drowned me. But it's a shocking reversal of the sweetness of the opening, in which small children speak very proudly and happily of their bog, who is dude. And many of the interpretations of this poem as a satire on cultish attachment to ideas, to things, to a religion, to a cause. But I think the happiest readers of Our Bog Is Dude are those who leave it alone, who don't seek to unpick, like the speaker in the poem, the narrator who tries to unpick it and ask and find out what bog and what dude are, and raises a little storm, really. They don't want to answer because they have no real common version. They don't agree within themselves about who and what bog and dude are. But if you don't accept that they have the right to take bog and dude to be what they think it is, and now we've discovered that they don't agree on it, it means what they separately think it is. So anybody can have their bog and their dude. And if you don't agree, we'll just kill you. And that's a shocking turn. But it suddenly becomes strangely Orwellian. And Orwell was a personal friend of Stevie's. And there's just a terrifying moment there, suggesting that the bog is dude is either a statement of totalitarianism or a declaration of the end of totalitarianism. It's not at all clear. The little children threaten the speaker, and then the speaker threatens back at the end of the poem, saying the sea that should soon drown them all, that never yet drowned me. So it's interesting that she, we don't have to, but we could suppose this to be Stevie speaking, says really all things shall pass, but I have not been drowned by the sea, the waves, the storm of belief. And so I survive, whereas all forms of belief and the believers themselves are drowned in the end by the sea of time and history. But better perhaps not to even offer this kind of interpretation, but just relish the sound of Our Bog Is Dude. Which could go both ways. It could be a celebration of the bog or a declaration that the bog is no more. I suspend both in my mind at the same time, and love Stevie Smith for offering me this exquisite ambiguity this surrealism that I love for its long British tradition. I recommend her to you, and thank you for listening to my little talk about her.